Welcome to It's Still Here. My name is Luke Blackburn. Last week we talked about trying to bring awareness and try to recognize patterns in the sort of involuntary mind movement that most of us experience on a day-to-day basis. These are things that our mind focuses on, thinks about, while we're just going through our days. Could be worries about the past or regrets about the past, anxieties, worries about the future. Could be pleasant thoughts, it could be bad thoughts, it could be unnecessary, it could be silly, it could be scary, whatever it might be. Most of us do experience this sort of mental activity, this mental noise even. And we talked about trying to bring awareness to that. Most of us have had this phenomenon happen in our heads ever since, we can remember for our whole lives. And we don't really think about it because it's just sort of always there. And we talked about, being able to bring awareness to it, start to understand patterns, and then slowly we can start to quiet it and be more present right now with what's happening around us, and start to train our mind to be more responsive to what we want it to do as opposed to it sort of controlling us. And now today we're going to be talking about sort of a tangential topic, sort of right on the same pathway. And we're going to be talking about how that same sort of phenomenon creates mental stories or even mental narratives to help us sort of make sense and understand the world based upon a pre-existing sense of self that all of us have internally. So let's just start with a very simple example, one that's probably relatable for most people, at least at one point in your life. So let's say you're a single person, you go out for an evening, and you meet someone, you start talking to them, and you think, hey, this is an interesting person, I'd like to get to know them more. You ask for their number, or you give them your phone number, and a few days pass. Either you call them, you text them, and they don't respond, or if you were the one who gave them your phone number, they haven't called you, they haven't texted you. That's a situation that's probably happened to most of us, and the probably subconscious, involuntary reaction is to start trying to make sense of it. And based upon our sense of self, especially if it is an existing negative sense of self, we start to create these stories about the situation. We might say, well, I don't even know why I tried. I'm never going to find love. I'm damaged goods. Or, they were way too attractive for me. They're way out of my league. Or, some form of way to try to explain something that just happened. But again, it's based upon a pre-existing sense of self. These stories often involve identifying as maybe a victim or potentially blaming others. It could even be, seeking validation of some kind. But, our minds are always creating these stories. Now, when I say it's our mind, what I mean is sort of this part of our mind that some people call the egoic mind. And the egoic mind is sort of the same thing that's responsible for this mental noise and the mental chatter that we talked about last time. It's sort of the same area that it tries to help us create a sense of identity and a sense of self. Now, probably the number one thing that humans look to the world for is a sense of self, is a sense of identity, to understand, who we are, where we come from, where we're going. These are all fundamental questions that all of us think about and wrestle with, and that's normal. But most of us are looking outwards for that. And these stories that we tell ourselves about situations, about things that happen to us, are just sort of an extension of that. It starts from past experience, lived experience that we've all, gone through. We slowly, over time, build this sense of self, and these stories reflect that. So, the egoic mind sort of uses these stories to just sort of build that self-image, to continue building the self-image, and it's even a sense of self-esteem. But as I mentioned, we're looking outward for a sense of self, and we really could be looking internally for a sense of self, because anything outward, anything from the mind, really is, you could call it a sort of just a mental construct, something that may not even be real. For example, the person that either didn't respond or the person who never texted you, there could be 1,000 other reasons why that person didn't respond or didn't text you, that have nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your sense of, or it has nothing to do with your worth, your value, your validity. They may have entered your phone number wrong in their phone. They may be busy with their family or work. Maybe they have children. Maybe they were very drunk that night and they sobered up, and then they realized, hey, I don't have time for a relationship. Whatever it is, even if they did say to themselves, oh, well, I just don't want to talk to that person. The fact that we are just filling in the blanks, because we can't know, if they didn't respond to us, we can't know what the situation is, why they chose not to interact with us. We can't know that, but we're creating these stories to fill in the gaps. And that's a problem, because if you have a negative sense of self, these stories are often negative, and they create pain and suffering because they're furthering an idea in your head that you aren't good enough, that maybe you are always a victim. Whatever it may be. Even if you have a positive sense of self, there can be moments like this where it's, damaging to that sense of self, because you're like, oh, well, I thought people liked me. I thought the opposite sex liked me. I thought, whatever it may be. These stories are not really there to improve our lives. They're typically things that take away from our enjoyment and the positive nature of who we think we are, and that sort of thing. And the alternative is just take what happened as fact and don't fill in the story. What does that look like? Well, it looks like, okay, I gave a person my number one night. We were out partying, and I gave someone my number. I texted them, and they didn't respond. Okay, that's it. That's the only story you need, because that's actually what happened. There's no need for us to get a whole thing going. We don't need the extra part. What was fact remains fact. And it's it's a completely different way of doing things, and it's not easy. We have our entire lives been sort of just thrown to the wind by our egoic mind, whether it is mental activity, mental noise, or if it is these stories that sort of further create a sense of separateness. We identify with these stories. It creates, or it perpetuates an existing sense of self that so often is very negative, and it's life denying. It's not life affirming. So these stories, as I mentioned, all of us sort of have them. They come in all different shapes and sizes. It could be something related to your work. It could be something related to a close friend. It could be something related to a random incident. Whatever it is, we tell ourselves, we create these narratives that are, again, oftentimes things that aren't helpful. So in the spirit of last week, when we talked about just trying to understand the nature of our mental movement, the involuntary things that happen throughout the day, this week is the same. We're trying to first understand and bring awareness to this thing that's happening, that's probably been happening our entire lives, or at least as long as we can remember. And we're trying to bring conscious awareness to it and then start to see patterns. Because the problem, as I mentioned, is that we create these stories and then we identify with them because they're based on a pre-existing sense of self. What we're trying to do and how we can improve our life and how we can improve our mental well-being is we're trying to disidentify from these stories. We're trying to disidentify with this mental activity that's happening in our heads. Because when we can live in the present moment without narratives, without mental noise, we can exist in a way that's completely different from anything you've ever experienced before, because it's free. It's free of judgment. It's free of labeling. It's free of seeking a validation. It's free of victimhood. And it's a pure sort of way to live. And when you can base your sense of self off of that experience of being free, of being open, of being tied to something much deeper than a shallow sense of self that the world gives us, that's when the beauty of life can really shine. So the biggest thing is, for folks like us, we're just starting on this journey. We have to first bring awareness to things that are going on. Then we need to find patterns, because once we can find the patterns, we can start to realize just how untrue the things that are going on inside of our minds are. And once you can understand how untrue they are, it's easier to start to rise above them by quieting the mind and disidentifying with it. And only then can you start to pay attention to the things that are true and start to solidify them, in your own life, in your own being, and create a sense of self that's deep and that's true and that's life-giving and life-affirming. So, I think that's probably it for this week. I think that covers it. Really appreciate you watching, and I'm not necessarily sure what we're going to cover next week. There's certainly some ideas and topics that I have in mind, but if you have a strong desire to hear about anything, let me know in the comments, and we'll go from there. So thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Take care.